Hello again, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Utopia. Lions and tigers and bears, oh my! Actually, we have geese and deer and bears, oh yes, because today we explore ways in which humans and wild animals are coexisting. Here's Sean King with our comprehensive story about the wildlife we have here in Utah.
Utah is home to some of the country's most inspiring wildlife, and this is not a recent phenomena. Millions of years ago in Utah, there existed elephant-sized ground sloths, beavers the size of bears, and even camels. Presently, if you know where to look in Utah, you can find pronghorn, the fastest land animal in the world over long distances. If you know where to explore, you could witness the death-defying feats of the mountain goat whose balance among the jagged mountain peaks would make your jaw drop. Humans have long fought to remove themselves from the wild. To live among wild beasts was dangerous and life-threatening. Today, it seems that dynamic has drastically changed. These days, the biggest danger to the wildlife is humans. Because of this, we must learn to live with wildlife, or we may be living without wildlife.
If you look at the projections in Utah, our population is expected to double in the next 30 years, and a lot of that's going to occur on the Wasatch Front. With that comes competition between humans and wildlife.
Can humans live in harmony with wildlife? Can humans strike a balance with the critters that called Utah home long before Europeans settled the landscape? To the folks at the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, the answer is a resounding yes.
The mission of the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources is to serve the citizens of Utah as the guardian and trustee of the state's wildlife. If we can improve landscapes and habitats to help wildlife populations, that's what we're interested in. As the Division of Wildlife Resources, we want to manage for healthy, robust populations of wildlife, particularly deer. And part of that is managing their distribution.
As part of the Department of Natural Resources, the Division of Wildlife Resources is often tasked with translocating animals to aid the propagation of the species. This includes big game animals.
Big game populations are doing really well today, especially compared to 50 years ago. We have more moose on the landscape. We've restored bighorn sheep. We've restored pronghorn to many parts of the state. Moose have migrated on their own from Idaho and Wyoming, and we've actively been managing those. We have about 4,000, 4,500 in Utah right now. Mountain goats, 50 years ago we didn't have mountain goats in the States. We have about 2,000 today. Most every big game population is doing better, except deer. You know, in the 1960s, deer hit their peak in Utah, and although the deer populations are doing a lot better today than they were 20 years ago, we're still not at those all-time highs that we had in the 1960s.
In the early 1800s, America's frontier teemed with wildlife. Today, the places described in the journals would be barely recognizable to its early explorers. But through the efforts of agencies like the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, the future looks bright.
Bighorn sheep were one of the most ubiquitous animals in Utah at the time that it was first settled. And since then, populations have declined. And in about the 1960s, we had very small populations of desert bighorn sheep, and Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep were virtually extirpated from the state. Since then, we've done a lot of restoration efforts. We've worked with sportsman communities, a lot of different partners to try to restore bighorns. And we went from a couple hundred sheep in the 1960s to close to 5,000 sheep today. Bighorn sheep translocations, the way that they occur is you get in a helicopter and you fly over bighorns, and you have what they call a net gun. And this gun, it doesn't shoot bullets, it shoots nets. So you get over and you shoot, and it spreads this net out, and the animals get caught up in it. And we hop out and we tie them up, and we take them back, and we put GPS radio collars on them so we know where they're going, how they're surviving. We take health samples, do health assessments on these animals, and we try to put them in areas where they're going to thrive.
One of the recent success stories for the Bighorn Sheep program is the growth of the populations in and around Zion National Park.
We have a population of desert bighorn sheep down on the Zion unit, which is in the vicinity, and also including Zion National Park, that is just doing really well and just has been slowly growing over the past couple decades, and now is getting to a point where that population is just almost bursting at the seams, from a management standpoint.
Part of the responsible restoration is keeping livestock and wildlife separated, especially those species that may like to socialize. And when a population of bighorn are bursting at the seams, it's not always a good thing.
And we're becoming a little bit nervous about those animals, wandering and dispersing into areas where we have domestic sheep, which can cause contraction of disease, and then that can then be brought back into that population and cause a lot of detrimental problems to the entire population of bighorn sheep.
When using a phrase like natural ecosystem, it's important to remember that humans are a part of the natural ecosystem, but the goal is to achieve balance. Humans have long engineered the landscape. It's important we continue to do so to make sure that we don't lose any more species to extinction. As an example, in 1884, pronghorn faced extinction as numbers were in the low thousands, and early conservation groups called their extinction more of a probability than a possibility.
Current populations of pronghorn are doing really, really well in Utah. The populations are managed via hunting and also capturing and relocating pronghorn. And so every few years, particularly on the Parker Mountain, we use helicopters, we round up pronghorn, and we're able to relocate those pronghorn to other states that are looking for pronghorn to start new populations or bolster populations that they already have. And we also use those pronghorn in areas within Utah that need a little boost as well. So pronghorn are naturally going to be in fairly large groups or herds, and so when the helicopter is flying around, they're looking for those larger groups of pronghorn, and then it's almost like herding cattle with horses, except you're doing it with a helicopter. So they're literally just steering around, moving those pronghorn where they want them to go, and then pushing them into that funnel, which is the trap.
The pronghorn are chased to a 300-foot runway. The corridor is lined with netting that stretches, so when pronghorn jump into it in an attempt to escape, they bounce back. The pronghorn eventually end up in a large round corral. Pronghorn are often regarded as the second fastest land animal, second only to the cheetah, but pronghorn can sustain high speeds longer than cheetahs. Another interesting fact about pronghorn, they have a nearly 300-degree arc of vision without moving head or eyes, and can detect movement up to 4 miles away.
Pronghorn are not antelope. A lot of people call them antelope, but antelope live in Africa, and pronghorn live in Utah.
After the pronghorn have settled, they are wrangled by people appropriately named muggers, who then hold the pronghorn so biologists can tag ears and attach radio collars. In addition, blood and fecal samples are collected to test for disease. What started as 129 pronghorn from Montana that were released on Parker Mountain in the mid-60s has resulted in over 5,000 caught and moved to other locations in Utah and throughout the West. The protection of habitat and hunting restrictions have allowed pronghorn numbers to recover to an estimated national population between 500,000 and 1 million.
Don't go anywhere. Utopia will be right back.